I titled this one, Ticking Timelines of the Birthright War. So I posed a question in the invite on whether there are one or two birthright wars taking place in the end of days. And at the close of our session, we will see what all of you think. So in Daniel chapter 12, there are 3 timelines. Time, times, and a half, which of course we know equates to 1,260 days. And then there's the 1290 timeline and the 1335 timeline. So I was going to take a different approach tonight until this past Shabbat, when I listened to Vayishalach Torah portion, meaning and he went, taught by Matthew Nolan with Torah to the Tribes, and he taught this back in December of 2013. Now, it contained understanding that most should be aware of if they genuinely want to understand the latter days. We will listen to about half of that teaching tonight because I believe Yah's timing is divine, and he once again placed before my eyes what I feel he wants imparted in this study of Daniel and how it connects to the book of Revelation and how it connects for the days in which we live. We will also see in that teaching a connection to the number 210 and the number 220. Maybe some of you recall that from last week, the number 220, and we'll go over that again tonight. So that part really caught my attention. So last week, in the last verses of Daniel, where we read in verses 8 through 13, and I heard, but I did not understand. So I said, my master, what is the latter end of these matters? And he said, go, Daniel, for the words are hidden and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be cleansed and made white and refined. But the wrong shall do wrong, and none of the wrong shall understand, but those who have insight shall understand. And from the time that which is continual is taken away, and we know that that translation of the Hebrew word there for taken away is problematic, okay? Because over here to the right, it's the Hebrew word 5493. Why is it problematic? Because it can mean call back, or it can mean take away. So that's pretty problematic. Now, if you recall in the ABP translation, that word suor is translated as altered. And that is the premise that I have made my conclusions upon. But that is significant to know about that word. So, and from the time, and it makes a big difference on where you put the 1,290 days. That's pretty huge right there. But I don't want us to get too hung up on, oh my goodness, where do we put these timelines? No, we really need to have a general idea of the timelines. And more importantly, we need to know what's taking place in the final week, the final 7 years. So, and from the time that which is continual is taken away and the abomination that lays waste is set up is 1,290 days. Blessed is he who is waiting earnestly and comes to the 1,335 days. But you, speaking to Daniel, go your way till the end and rest and arise to your lot at the end of the days. So last week we went over timelines, and my general graphic to kind of keep us on the same page in communicating some of these things. Now, these are just my insights. I'm not saying I have the timelines figured out. There's different insights. I mean, there's different insights even in our study book, the book of Daniel by Charlene. And that's quite all right. Different perspectives and possibilities. So here, if we go by this being that which is continual as being the animal sacrifices and those that have the scepter and the rule to institute those animal sacrifices, if at the point when it is altered, then with this scripture and the abomination that lays waste is set up is 1,290 days. If I go with that definition, I would put it right here for it being the time that it would be altered. And then blessed is he who is waiting earnestly and comes to the 1,335 days. Here again, some put that to be coming at the very end, but I'm going to explain to you why I put it toward the beginning, and we'll see all of that unfold as well. Now, last week we also talked about how, you know, the abomination that lays waste 1,290 days, and from the time of the 2,300-day timeline. Now, see, most of the time, I think people forget about the 2,300-day timeline. And with that being the time covering the abominations, whether it's animal sacrifices or whether it transmutes into including the death of people, will be 2,300 days. But the abomination that lays waste is 1,290 days of that, which left over 1,010 days that would be equated, as I see it, to the animal sacrifices. We also looked at the word thousand. For those of you that study Hebrew words, I found that very interesting, and maybe y'all, most of you that study that knew that thousand is also the word aleph, which meant an ox head, being the first letter of the alphabet, and this eventually used as a numeral 1,000. So it actually could translate to blessed is he who is waiting earnestly and comes to the aleph, the 1,335 days. And then the H504 term, if you recall, we found meant a family. So blessed is he who is waiting earnestly and comes to the aleph, or the family. And then we had looked at, and this was just something I was led to do, was just to look at these numerical values and just see what Hebrew word it connected to. And it was pretty amazing, because 1335 connected to Bethor or Bether. It means part, piece of the parts of an animal cut in half for a sacrifice. So blessed is he that comes to the 1,335 days, to the aleph, to the family, to the one that we have entered into a blood ratified covenant with. So again, very significant. And the point that the 1010 Hebrew word is connected to Beth Baal Meon, meaning the house of Baal, which would start, if it would start right there at the 1,290, because the two numbers equal 2,300. So this would pretty much, the latter days would pretty much equate to the time period of the reign of the Antichrist and the reign, if you will, of the house of Baal. And then I went ahead and looked up the 1290 numerical meaning Hebrew word, which means to kneel, and it means knee, barak. And it also goes on to say, by euphemism, to curse Yahweh or the king as treason. So that is going to be a time that there is rebellion toward Yahweh. So tonight, what I want us not to lose sight of is what this 2,300-day timeline war is all about. You know, what is all of this about? What is it pointing to? What's the rub? And this end time war is over the birthright and the breach between the king and kingdom. And I see this war as twofold, because as I was listening to that video teaching, I really had to chew on it, and I got, you know, I knew most of it. But the more I thought about birthright, I saw two birthright wars. And it really coincides with this timeline we've been looking at. The first one is between the two houses, the house of Judah, which is the kingship aspect, and Israel, which is the kingdom. And I'll go into that further. And the second one is really between Esau in the nations and Jacob, the true Israel remnant born from above. So one is more internal in the body of believers, and one is externally affecting Yahweh's people. So the birthright war number one, as I see it, is between the king and the kingdom. Now, this is the part that gets into the video that we're going to watch a portion of, because through Judah came the king, the throne, the scepter, Genesis 49:10. The scepter shall not turn aside from Judah, nor an inscriber from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him is the obedience of peoples. And then through Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, equating to Israel, came the birthright to the land, kingdom. And we read about that in 1 Chronicles 5, verse 1 and 2. As for the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, he was the firstborn. But because he profaned his father's bed, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, son of Israel, so that the genealogy is not listed according to the birthright. For Judah prevailed over his brothers, and from him came a ruler, although the birthright was Joseph's. That's a big deal, and we're going to be well versed in it by the end of this evening. Now, on the other side, we have the birthright war that I see, of course, continuing between Esau and Jacob. And we saw it begin in Genesis 25, verse 22. And within her, the children struggled, and her is Rebekah. And within her, the children struggled together. And she said, if all is right, why am I this way? So she went to ask Yahweh. And Yahweh said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples shall be separated from your body, and one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older serve the younger. And then in verse 31 through 33 of chapter 25, but Jacob said, sell me your birthright today. And Esau said, look, I'm going to die, so why should I have birthright? Then Jacob said, swear to me today. And he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. In chapter 27 of Genesis, verse 36, Esau doesn't really recall that account very clearly. He says, and Esau said, was his name then called Jacob? For he has caught me by the heel these 2 times. He took my birthright, and see, now he has taken my blessing. And he said, and he's talking to his father, Isaac, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Then later in verse 38 through 40 of Genesis chapter 27, and Esau said to his father, have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, oh my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac, his father, answered and said to him, see, your dwelling is of the fatness of the earth and of the dew of the heavens from above. And by your sword you are to live and serve your brother. And it shall be, when you grow restless, that you shall break his yoke from your neck. So that's a significant prophecy right there in Genesis chapter 27, verse 40. It's something that Kimberly Rogers Brown brought out in her study, The Esau Effect. And I had not seen that before, but that makes the timeline sample that we're looking at make a lot of sense, that when Esau grows restless, that he shall break his yoke from his neck. So last week also we looked at the significance of the number 220, because that's the number of days between the beginning of the last week and the 2300-day timeline. And at the time, I just wanted to just research about the number 220. I personally didn't know anything about it. And then I found that it stated in his word one time. 220 is just stated in the Bible one time. And it's in Ezra 8:20. And it said, and of the Nethinim, whom David and the princes had given for the service of the Levites, 220 Nethinim, all of them were mentioned by name. And in Benson's commentary we reviewed last week, of them, 220 upon this hasty summons listed themselves and had the honor to be expressed by name in Ezra's muster roll, meaning that was the time that they were returning to rebuild the temple and the wall. This success Ezra ascribes to the good hand of Yahweh upon them. If where ministers have been wanting, the vacancies are well supplied, let Yah have the glory and his good hand, qualifying them for the service, inclining them to it, and then opening a door of opportunity for them. So we're going to look at some of that understanding and how it may possibly connect to the 2 witnesses being called forth. Now, Nethinim, as I've been pronouncing it, it actually looks like it's pronounced Nathein. It means the second form is the proper form as passive participle from H5414. it's talking about one given. So it's talking about one given to like the temple service. So it's talking about those that were appointed, those that were charged, those that were counted, those that were given, granted, charged up, sent out, shoot forth, would to Yah yield. Why is that significant? Because in Revelation, the beginning of Revelation 11, we read, and a reed like a measuring rod was given to me, meaning John the Revelator, and the messenger stood saying, rise and measure the dwelling place of Elohim and the slaughter place and those worshiping in it. Now, who would be worshiping in the dwelling place of Elohim? It's those that have drawn close to him, those that are doing temple service, those that are following and guarding his commandments. And the measuring is not so much how big is this building. No, it's measuring our dedication and how we live for him. That's what's being measured. But it goes on to say, but cast out the court which is outside the dwelling place, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they shall trample the set apart city underfoot for 42 months. Now that 42 months, I'm pretty sure, is at the very latter end. And I shall give unto my 2 witnesses. So first, you see a measuring, which could also be a counting of those worshiping in the dwelling place. Others are cast out, which is outside the dwelling place. And it says, I shall give unto my 2 witnesses. Give is also connected to the word nathain. And I shall give unto my 2 witnesses, those doing temple service, if you will, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clad in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees, which very well could represent the spirit of Elijah and Moses, representing the house of Judah and the house of Israel, and the 2 lampstands. Now, lampstands were associated with the 7 congregations in the book of Revelation. So the 2 lampstands could very well be equated to the congregation of Philadelphia and the congregation of Smyrna that had no condemnation. Actually, he commended them, that are standing before the Elohim of the earth. So if we look at this back, working with the timeline, just as to kind of put all these scriptures into where we might be in this last 7-year period, not so much, like I said, to plot timelines, but to understand what's going on and to actually see all the variables that one has to consider to even get this close to a timeline. So the Birthright War number 1, as we have talked about, is between the 2 houses, Judah, the kingship, and Israel, the kingdom. And so I just want us to focus really on this first part of the timeline, because we will probably see animal sacrifices reinstituted by those presently in the state of Israel that follow the Talmud, and they say they are Jews and are not. They're not following his covenant commandments, and they are claiming the land and giving it the name Israel, when we know the 10 tribes are lost tribes are still scattered among the nations, as well as the southern tribes. All 12 tribes actually are still scattered. Now, do some actually reside in the state of Israel? Absolutely. Who's who? You will know them by their fruit. So what happened between Judah and Israel? We already read the scriptures. We know through Judah came the king, and we know that the birthright was Joseph's. We've just read all of these scriptures. So Israel was one body at the beginning, correct? They were led out of Egypt. They wandered for 40 years, so forth and so forth, and they entered the promised land. They have King David, followed by King Solomon. But after the death of King Solomon, there was a breach between Israel and Judah, because Rehoboam wanted to be hard and tax heavily, and there was a split. And that occurred at 931 BCE, and Israel only lasted as a separate kingdom till 721 BCE and was exiled. And so that is when that separation occurred. In Jeremiah, we read, "Return, O backsliding children, declares Yahweh, for I shall rule over you and shall take you, one from a city and two from a clan, and shall bring you to Zion." It's going to be Yahweh that brings Israel to Zion, or Zion. "And I shall give you shepherds according to my heart, and they shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. And it shall be, when you have increased and shall be fruitful in the land in those days, declares Yahweh, that they no longer say the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, neither would it come to heart, nor would they remember it, nor would they visit it, nor would it be made again. At that time, Jerusalem shall be called the throne of Yahweh, and all the nations shall be gathered to it, to the name of Yahweh, to Jerusalem, and no longer walk after the stubbornness of their evil heart. In those days, the house of Judah shall go to the house of Israel, and they shall come together out of the land of the north to the land that I have given as an inheritance to your fathers. But I said, how would I put you among the children and give you a pleasant land, a splendid inheritance of the hosts of nations? And I said, call me my father, and do not turn away from me. But indeed, as a wife betrays her husband, so have you betrayed me, O house of Israel, declares Yahweh. A voice was heard on the bare heights, weeping supplications of the children of Israel, because they have perverted their way, and they have forgotten Yahweh their Elohim. Return, O backsliding children, I shall make your backslidings cease. See, we have come to you, for you are Yahweh our Elohim. Truly, delusion comes from the high hills, the noisy throng on the mountains. Truly, in Yahweh our Elohim is the deliverance of Israel. For shame has devoured the labor of our fathers from our youth, their flocks and their herds, their sons and their daughters. We shall lie down in our shame while our reproach covers us. For we have sinned against Yahweh our Elohim, we and our fathers, from our youth even to this day, and have not obeyed the voice of Yahweh our Elohim. So we will be seeing in the latter days the house of Judah shall go to the house of Israel, because in the latter days the two sticks will become one. And as we saw in Revelation verse 3 and 4, when it says that Yahweh shall give unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days clad in sackcloth. This is the definition of the two witnesses right here. The two olive trees, these meaning the two witnesses, are the two olive trees, which is very possible the spirit of Moses and Elijah, or possibly even Moses and Elijah, representing the house of Judah and house of Israel, and the two lampstands, like I said, very possibly the assembly of Philadelphia and the assembly of Smyrna that are standing before the Elohim of the earth. So they will prophesy 1,260 days. So the question is, when does that begin? Well, I put it toward the front of this 7-year period because beginning with the animal sacrifices, we will see those reinstituted by the present day Talmudic Israel. We will see a great falling away because all of the Christian Zionists and those that have been sucked into Christian Zionism will think that this is a good thing. Oh, they're getting what they call their third temple built. Oh, they're getting their altar set up. Oh, they're going back to animal sacrifices. And what? They're not even thinking straight. They are being deceived. And what is happening is that they would be trampling on the blood of Yahushua HaMashiach. There will be great confusion and disorientation, as we already see taking place. They have not stayed in the word. They need direction. They need to understand what's taking place. And that very well may be who the two witnesses are witnessing to. Now, the witnesses witness for 1,260 days. Now, some people may put it in this last 42 months. For now, I'm leaving it in the first 42 months from the time that the peace agreement is signed. And of course, there's about a 7 to 8 month period where nothing is really taking place until the animal sacrifices are reinstituted. We know that at the end of their witness, which would make it about midway here, about the same time that Satan is kicked out of heaven, they are killed by the beast, not the dragon, not Satan. They are killed by the beast out of the pit recorded in Revelation 11, verse 7. And they lay dead 3.5 days and are called up to heaven, which we also equated to some depictions of the red heifer, those that are his bride going to the altar outside the camp and who have been crucified with Yahusha, and it is no longer they that live, but Yahusha that lives in them and through them. Now, so they are not taken up till after 3.5 days. And the next scene that is recorded is in Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 6, where we see the woman clothed in the sun with the moon at her feet and a crown of 12 stars. And so we have the two witnesses are called up in Revelation 11, and then we have this very unified picture of this woman that is giving birth to her child, with the dragon ready and waiting to devour the child. And I see the child as the final birthing of Israel, with Yahusha as the head. He is the head, we are the body. The head is delivered first. And as soon as the child is delivered, the child is caught up to the throne room of Yahweh. But then what happens? Then this heavenly scene that we see shifts, because Satan, the dragon, is kicked out of heaven midway in Revelation 12. And then we also see the woman being given 2 wings like an eagle, because Satan is coming after her and spewing massive amount of water after her, and the earth opens up and helps the woman. But she's given 2 wings like an eagle, and she's flown to the wilderness, where she's nourished for times and half a time by Elohim. And this enrages Satan, and he goes to make war with the remnant of her seed, those keeping the commandments of Yahweh and bearing the witness of Yahushua HaMashiach. So these people are definitely on fire for Yahusha. And as I mentioned last week, they're having to fight directly with the dragon, Satan. And the other time that is mentioned where there's a direct encounter with Satan is the assembly of Smyrna. So the woman in this last 3.5-year time period is taken to the wilderness, and she's sheltered and she's nourished for 3.5 years. And then Satan wars with the remnant of her seed, which may be the 144,000 that possibly are sealed for this specific time period to witness and save as many out of the great tribulation as possible. Now, I want us to also think about this possibility and to the 1335 days, because it is an unusual time period. And if we did start it at the beginning, it would extend a little bit past this midway point. And I thought about 2 Thessalonians, when it reads, as to the coming of our Master Yahushua HaMashiach and our gathering together to him, we ask you, brothers, not to become easily unsettled in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as if the day of Yahweh has come. That's kind of a preterist point of view, like it's just history, it's already happened. So Paul is correcting that mindset. Let no one deceive you in any way, because the falling away is to come first. And the man of lawlessness is to be revealed, the son of destruction. Okay, all right. Okay, so what do we have here? Okay, so let no one deceive you in any way, because the falling away is to come first. Could this be part of that falling away when people are being excited about reinstituting animal sacrifices when we know that Yahushua HaMashiach chose to lay down his life once and for all, that he is our high priest after the order of Melchizedek, that the Aaronic Levitical priesthood served its purpose until Yahushua would come? Could this be the falling away? Let no one deceive you in any way, because the falling away is to come first. And the man of lawlessness is to be revealed. So about this midway in here, when the man of lawlessness breaks that covenant agreement, correct? Midway in the week, 3.5 years, he breaks the covenant, is to be revealed the son of destruction. So that's another reason why I put the two witnesses in this first half, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called Elohim, or that is worship, so that he sits as Elohim in the dwelling place of Elohim, showing himself that he is Elohim. Do you not remember that I told you this while I was still with you? And now you know what restrains for him to be revealed in his time. For the secret of lawlessness is already at work, only until he who now restrains comes out of the midst. Now, some people think that's the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, being taken away from restraining. But I lean more towards that being the Archangel Michael, because people will be still being saved during this time of the Great Tribulation, and therefore the Ruach HaKodesh needs to be present. And then the lawless one shall be revealed, whom the master shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, eventually right here at the very end, and bring to naught with the manifestation of his coming. The coming of the lawless one is according to the work of Satan, with all power and signs and wonders of falsehood, and with all deceit of unrighteousness, and those perishing, because they did not receive the love of the truth in order for them to be saved. And for this reason, Elohim sends them a working of delusion for them to believe the falsehood, in order that all should be judged who did not believe the truth, but have delighted in the unrighteousness. So, as to the coming of our Master, Yahushua Messiah, and our gathering together to him, that's not going to take place until the falling away takes place first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed. So if the blessing comes with the 1335, those that are earnestly waiting, and we know at some point here in the midway, after the witnesses are killed, they are called up to heaven. But it doesn't seem like they would be called up to heaven until the falling away takes place and the man of lawlessness is revealed. Now, that definitely would be a blessing to be called up if it is the congregation of Philadelphia and Smyrna being the two witnesses. That would be a great blessing for those waiting earnestly for the falling away to take place, for the lawless one to be revealed, and if this, which appears very clearly to be a catching away, take place. So that's another reason why I look at this 1335 being in the first half. Now, again, I see the catching aways possibly being associated with Yahweh's Moedim, his feast, the spring feast of Passover, unleavened bread and first fruit, then the time of Pentecost, and the latter harvest during the time of the olives and the grapes, those living and surviving and coming out of the great tribulation. So that is why I think so many people have had conflict. Well, is there a pre-trib rapture? Is there a mid-trib rapture? Is there a post-trib rapture? Is there a post-trib pre-wrath rapture? It's more of a catching away. And I simply am just looking at the scriptures and seeing when those catching aways take place. So we have the catching away of the two witnesses. We have the catching away of the child that is birthed. We have the lateral catching away of the woman to the wilderness for 3.5 years. So that's how I equate and see that. This is just food for thought, for looking at all these variables and how would you bring them together. And it really makes you look at what's going on in his word, what is the conflict, and so forth and so on. So all of these cross-reference verses to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 are excellent, but I want us to focus on Acts 7, verse 42. Now, chapter 7 of Acts is the most beautiful account of the Melchizedek message ever articulated, and it's articulated by Stephen. So I'm just going to read a portion of this. It says, "This is he who was in the assembly," speaking of Moses, "in the wilderness with the messenger who spoke to him on Mount Sinai, and with our fathers who received the living words to give to us, unto whom our fathers would not become obedient, but thrust away, and in their hearts they turned back to Egypt, saying to Aaron, Make us mighty ones to go before us. For this Moses who led us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." And they made a calf in those days and brought an offering to the idol, and were rejoicing in the works of their own hands. So Elohim turned and gave them up to worship the host of the heaven, as it has been written in the book of the prophets. "Did you bring slaughtered beasts and offerings unto me during 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? And you took up the tent of Molech and the star of your mighty one, Kaun, images which you made to bow before them. Therefore I shall remove you beyond Babel. The tent of witness was with our fathers in the wilderness, as he appointed, instructing Moses to make it according to the pattern that he had seen, which our fathers, having received it in turn, also brought with Joshua into the land possessed by the nations, whom Elohim drove out before the face of our fathers until the days of David, who found favor before Elohim and asked to find a dwelling for the Elohim of Jacob. But Solomon built him a house. However, the Most High does not dwell in dwellings made with hands, as the prophet says, The heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. What house shall you build for me, says Yahweh, or what is the place of my rest? Has my hand not made all these? You stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, you always resist the set apart spirit as your fathers did, you also do. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed those who before announced the coming of the righteous one, of whom you now have become the betrayers and murderers. I mean, this is Stephen articulating the Melchizedek message before the Sanhedrin, who received the Torah as it was ordained by messengers, but did not watch over it. So these cross references, it states, unless you lift up your eyes to the heavens and shall see the sun and the moon and the stars and all the host of the heavens, and you be drawn away into bowing down to them and serving them, which Yahweh your Elohim has allotted to all the people under all the heavens. And in 17:3 of Deuteronomy, and has gone and served other mighty ones and bowed down to them, or to the sun, or to the moon, or to any of the host of the heavens, which I have not commanded. And in 2 Kings 23:5, and he put down the black-robed priests, whom the sovereigns of Judah had appointed to burn incense. So just slow it down and listen to that. And he put down the black-robed priest, whom the kings of Judah had appointed to burn incense on the high places in the cities of Judah and in the places all around Jerusalem, and those who burned incense to Baal, to the sun and to the moon and to the constellations and to all the host of the heavens. The black robe priest and the black robe regiment can be seen today. Yahushua HaMashiach himself faced black-robed priest. And Yahushua HaMashiach himself told us if they hated him, they would hate us. We see other accounts of the black robe regiment, like in the Supreme Court, like in Catholicism, like in Judaism, like in Islam, and in the Jesuit order. We had just read in verse 43 of Acts 7, no, you carried the tent of Molech and the star of your god Rephan, the idols you made so that you could worship them. Therefore, I will send you into exile beyond Babel. So we see the star of Remphan or Kaiun and the tent of Molech. We see the symbolism here. We see even the symbolism in the United States of the United States emblem and how it coincides with sun god worship and mother goddess worship. As discussed before, the present day state of Israel is not the Israel born from above and registered in heaven. The present state of Israel in the Middle East was created by man, and the name of Israel was usurped and applied to that state, because we know that believers in Yahushua HaMashiach that have entered into the blood ratified covenant are Israel. They are the one new man. So question would be, would the true Israel, which at one time did reflect Yah's people, but today, would the true Israel be a place where a believer cannot even say his name, Yahushua HaMashiach? Does that sound like the place that would be the true Israel? So the 12 tribes are still scattered abroad. And though some may reside in the present state of Israel, as well as in all other nations, Yahweh has not gathered the true Israel from both houses into one yet. Those that say they are Jews but follow the Babylonian Talmud presently claim Yahweh's land. So possibly there are some from the house of Judah claiming that land, blowing off the 10 lost tribes, saying, oh, they're lost. No, Yahweh will gather his people together. Yahweh will gather the one new man, Israel. So the birthright war number 2, I see it between Esau and Jacob. And I see that taking place in this latter half of this last 7 years. So, and from the time that which is continual is taken away or altered, and the abomination that lays waste is set up is 1,290 days. And blessed is he who is waiting earnestly and comes to the 1,335 days. But you go your way till the end and rest and arise to your lot at the end of the days. So I'm just saying, and I'm just thinking that it would be really nice if this is the 1335 is to be called up to heaven, even though they're killed by the beast, but still called up to heaven before this great tribulation period. Well, one day we will see, won't we? And we went over all of these verses, but one of the key verses I want us to remember is this last one right here, Genesis 27, verse 40. You need to mark it in your Bibles. And by your sword you are to live, Isaac's talking to Esau, and serve your brother. And it shall be, when you grow restless, that you shall break his yoke from your neck. So the rise of Esau, I see taking place in the last 3.5 years. And so at the 1290, that's where we see the alteration right here of the animal sacrifices. They're transmuted into the abomination that lays waste, that desolates greatly Yah's set apart people and mighty ones. We know the Antichrist has a set limit. This part is for sure and for certain, 42 months. We read about that in Revelation 13, 4 and 5, and they worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast. So this Antichrist is empowered by Satan, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to fight with him? And he was given a mouth speaking great matters and blasphemies, and he was given authority to do so 42 months. And of course, that's the first beast of Revelation 13. And then the second beast is the false prophet and his minions, pushing everybody and encouraging more falling away to worship the beast. And at that same time, more than likely, there's so much going on in the spiritual realm, in the heavenlies. We also have the 144,000 witnessing, and we have the angels flying and going to the uttermost parts of the earth, in the most remotest part, and telling them, don't take the mark of the beast, don't worship the Antichrist, and sharing the gospel message. So there's so much happening. It's just going to be off the chart. It's going to be like no time like it has ever happened before. And we read in Daniel 8:23, and in the latter time of their rule, when the transgressors have filled up their measure, a sovereign, fierce of face and skilled at intrigues shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy incredibly, and shall prosper and thrive, and destroy mighty men and the set apart people. So many will believe, but they also may be martyrs. So Esau, end time beast rising against the remnant seed of the woman, which is part of Israel, Jacob. Believers set apart to Yahusha and other mighty men are destroyed incredibly. More than likely during this time period, the 144,000 are sealed that are guarding Yahweh's command and are witnessing to those going through all of this in the Great Tribulation. So that was an overview to look at that 2,300-day timeline, to look at the wars taking place over the birthright. And as I've been studying this, and as I was listening, and we're about to listen to that portion of teaching, it's all about birthright. It's all about the breach between the king and the kingdom. And we also see Satan himself trying to make himself king and trying to usurp Yahweh's kingdom. So again, that's what I see as the first birthright war between the house of Judah. And some of those may be fooled by those presently in Israel and may have bought into it. And at the very least, they should have named the territory Judah. They don't have the right to the name Israel because Joseph has the birthright to the land. And the northern kingdom was Israel. So only Joseph has the right to name that land Israel, but Judah has the right to the rule. For Judah prevailed over his brothers, and from him came a ruler, although the birthright was Joseph. So it is stated clearly. And then we've already gone over the scriptures about the birthright between Esau and Jacob, and how the prophecy in verse 40 shows us when Esau grows restless, that Esau shall break the yoke of Israel from his neck for a time period. So let's watch this teaching. Like I said, it was back in 2013, but it was timely, and he gives us insight to the number 210 as well as 220.
So this week's Torah portion comes to us from Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 32 and verse 3, extending through Bereshit, Genesis 36 and verse 43. The parsha is called Vayishlach, and he sent. And you can hear it in there, Vayishlach. You can hear the Hebrew word there for apostle, shalach, Vayishlach, shalach, means one who is sent, This is a great Torah portion, prophetically speaking. Of course, we're going to see now that Esau meets Yaakov after a period of absence. Within this week's Torah portion, we're going to see Esau comes to meet Yaakov. Of course, this portion includes the famous wrestling with Elohim, Yaakov and Esau meeting, and then the captivity, the abduction of Dinah, and Yaakov returning to Bethel, and the death of Rachel. There is a lot to talk about. There's a lot that relates to us, of course, because Yahweh's word is alive. It is alive. But this week's Torah portion, Esau meets Yaakov, and he's been absent from Yaakov. Can anyone tell me how many years? 22 years. 22 years. This week's Torah portion speaks about Yaakov's trouble. And how many of us, when we were regular Sunday attendees, we'd talk about Jacob's trouble and the great tribulation. And how long would we say that was going to be, Jacob's trouble? And we'd hear this term, oh, Jacob's trouble, we're going to be in Jacob's trouble. And we threw it around, I know I did, but really had no idea what it really meant from a scriptural point of view, from a scriptural perspective. Oh, I knew what it meant from a dogmatic religious. It was, Jacob's trouble was when I was going to get raptured and everybody else was going to be left behind to go through this terrible time of 7 years of tribulation. Now, as I studied the word more, I realized that, well, firstly, there isn't 7 years of tribulation. It's only 42 months, and 42 is twice 21 times 2, right? If my mathematics is correct. And we find now that Yaakov's trouble, this is the Torah portion where that phrase is coined. And then later on in Yirmiyahu chapter 30, we'll see the prophet Jeremiah speaks of this phrase again. So if we want to know about Jacob's trouble, Yaakov's trouble, then this is the portion for us. We will learn about how to get through Yaakov's trouble, how to get through the great tribulation. This parsha is going to lay bare the overwhelming terror that seizes Yaakov. And we know that even the Jewish rabbis said that when the Intifada happened in 2000, the rabbis came to the Kotel, the Western Wall, and they said, this is the time of Yaakov's trouble. And you remember all the suicide bombings and everything that happened in 2000, and from that time on, they're like, this must be the time of Yaakov's trouble. So the prophet Jeremiah says in the 7th verse of the 30th chapter, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Yaakov's trouble. It's the end of the age. We're going to see in this week's Torah portion what that means. It's about a division of camps, a division of houses into 2 companies. Judah and Ephraim are going to be wrestling with the composition of Yahweh. So it doesn't surprise me at this time that we've got people trying to infiltrate and sway brethren away from truth. Doesn't surprise me at all that Sister Brenda stood up and said what she needed to say. Verse 10 of Jeremiah chapter 30, therefore fear not, O my Eved Yaakov, says Yahweh, neither be discouraged. Don't be discouraged, O Israel, for see, I will save you from afar, and your Zerah seed from the land of their exile. That's us. We are in our exile now. And Yaakov shall shuv. Shuv comes from, it's the root word of teshuvah. Yaakov, the house of Jacob, the flock of Jacob, they're going to repent. And the biblical term of repent means return to Torah. We just sung it. And they shall be in rest. They shall be in the Shabbat. They shall be in the Shabbat, and they shall be in Shalom, and no one shall make him afraid. For I am with you, says Yahweh, to save you. Though I make a full end of all nations where I have scattered you, yet will I not make a full end of you. What's Yahweh going to do with the nations that he's scattered? Because this false prophetic voice that goes out through America, that America is in end-time prophecy, and that America, the USA, is the eagle and is going to be saved. And I mean, Yahweh says that any nation outside of Israel, which is only his nation, I'm not talking about Zionist, the state right now, that will be destroyed so that the biblical Israel can be raised up. What does Yahweh say about the nations? For I will make an end of all nations. All means all, and it means all. All nations, where I have scattered you, yet will I not make a full end of you, but I will correct you or discipline you in measure, and will not leave you altogether unpunished. Will we be affected by the destruction that comes upon the nations of our exile? For sure and for certain. So this is the time of preparation, not the time of listening to foolish voices that this is Babylon, that this is the prophetic eagle. I mean, and oh my goodness, it's out there. And people are grasping for straws because it makes you feel good, but it's not reality. It is not reality. The reality is that Yahweh is going to raise up biblical Israel. But first of all, the counterfeit state will be dealt with. And Yeshua spoke about that in the parable of the fig tree. Verse 17 of Jeremiah 30. For I will restore health to you. Restore health to you in the scriptures is a phrase that means an end of your exile. If you're in sickness, you're in exile. But if health is restored to you, that means it's the end of your exile. Because sickness is associated with departure from Torah. Brings sickness. And I will heal you of your wounds, says Yahweh, because they called you an outcast, saying, this is Zion, whom no man seeks after. This, says Yahweh, see, I will turn back the exile of Yaakov's tents. So get your tents ready. And have rachamim on his dwelling places. And the city shall be rebuilt upon its own heap, and the palace shall remain in its right place. But look what verse 24 says. In the latter days, then you will understand this. In the latter days. Chapter 31, verse 6 says, for there shall be a day that the called out Netzarim or Notzrim, that's another word for followers of Yeshua, who watch out on the mount of Ephraim shall teruah, shall cry with the sound of a shofar, arise and let us go up to Zion, to Yahweh our Elohim. Yaakov's trouble is in our prophetic future, and in the last days you shall understand it. There's a lot to cover today. Bereshit 32 and verse 3. And Yaakov sent malachim, angels. Now these angels would have been from where? When did he last have an encounter with a lot of angels? Ascending and descending. He sent the heavenly malachim before him to Esau, his brother, to the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded them, saying, so shall you speak to my master Esau. Your Eved Yaakov says this, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. So let's dig into this time of Yaakov's trouble. It actually refers to, not doctrinally, not religiously, but in the Bible, in the scriptures, Yaakov's trouble refers to two 21-year times in Yaakov's life. Two 21-year cycles in his life. That's the biblical definition of Yaakov's trouble. And then from there, you'll see that Yahweh uses that as a foundation to build upon the 210 years cycles from that. It's amazing. Which will be national. So the two 21-year fulfillment cycles are the foundational definition in the scriptures of Yaakov's trouble. 210 is a multiplication, 21 times 10. And that is going to deal with national issues of trouble and restoration. So we're going to see this now played out with Yaakov's fulfillment and then a national fulfillment. Two 21-year cycles, and then we'll get into the 210-year cycles. Let's look at the first trouble. Yaakov was in trouble when he sojourned with Laban. When Yaakov arrived in Haran, he was a pauper. He was a pauper because en route he was robbed of the dowry that his father Yitzhak had given him for a bride. He was robbed by a son of Esau called Eliphaz. And we mentioned him when we dealt the other week with who? He did, exactly. We mentioned that, and we also mentioned him in association with Amalek and the Amalekites. Exactly. So he was robbed by a son of Esau called Eliphaz in exchange for his life. Now that's recorded in the book of Yasher, chapter 29, verse 30. Now how long was Yaakov's first trouble? 21 years. 7 years plus 7 years, and he was released after he had served 6 years, and in the 7th year he went free. Yaakov was in fact an indentured servant. He was a bondservant. If we rebel against Yahweh, like Yaakov, then a set period of bondage will follow for us. A set period of bondage will always follow if you rebel against Yahweh. It's in Yahweh's Torah, and we can't get around it. It was a time of servitude as a bondservant for 3 rest year cycles. That's what Yaakov was in. 3 rest year cycles, 21 years of servitude. The time of bondage is directly connected to the time of the bondservants. And what do the apostles say that we are? We are to be bondservants. So we can expect to see this cycle in our life. I do not believe in the imminent return of Yeshua. The Bible does not teach an imminent return of Yeshua. That's what Rav Shaliach Shaul was addressing to the Thessalonians. He was dealing with that very issue. There is no imminent return. Things have to happen in order for him to return. Let's continue on. It's very interesting because when Yaakov began to return to Canaan, he wrestled with the Malach, the angel at Peniel. And we see that in this week's Torah Parsha, chapter 32, verse 24. And that is when we find that Yaakov's name is given as Israel. And from Peniel, Israel went to Sukkot, where he stayed for 1.5 years, according to Yasher, chapter 33, verse 4. So we better get used to going to Sukkot, because prophetically, that we're going to be in those tents for at least 1.5 years, according to the prophetic shadow picture. It's very interesting on a sod level. The numbers 22 and 21 are very significant. In Gematria, 22 is the number of light, and it appears 22 times, funny enough, in the Gospel of John. 21 is indicative of bondage to sin prior to a great release, which of course is depicted in the number 22, light. Darkness coming into light, 21 into 22. These two numbers represent a progression from hard labor and bondage caused by us following the flesh. So the last generation will experience 42 months of tribulation, of course 42 being double 21, meaning this is going to be double the tribulation that Yaakov went through. Double the tribulation. It's going to be a great tribulation. Does that make sense? There's 21 recorded sins of Israel in the book of Numbers. It tells you the 21 sins of Israel between the Exodus and the Jordan. It's very interesting. Now you take this 21 and now you work into a national level, and you find it turning from 21 into 21 times 10, 210-year cycle. There's a prophetic breach between the messianic line and the birthright, and that's what we're dealing with right now. It's a breach. We are living in the time of a breach between king and kingdom. And the king would come through what line? Judah. And Judah would birth the line of the king. Now, the biggest deception on the world right now The biggest deception, and it will play out into the Great Tribulation, it plays out to exactly what you just spoke about, is that in 1948, Theodore Herzl and his minions set up a state, and instead of calling it what they could have legally called it, the state of Judah, which would have been a stretch because most of them were Khazarian converts from the Caspian region, they in fact changed it to be called the state of Israel. So 1955 was a very embarrassing year for pastors in America. An extremely embarrassing year. Why? 1955. Pastors across America had omelets all over their face because their predictions failed. The 7-year tribulation from 1948 to 1955 did not materialize because the nation of Israel that was invented in 1948 was not the biblical fulfillment of prophecy of Israel. It was a creation of Judah by Khazarian converts from the Caspian Sea region, and therefore every single Bible prophecy has failed and will continue to fail from there. We have to realize that there right now is a breach between Judah and Ephraim. Judah has done the work that they were destined and created to do, which was to bring forth the king. But Judah cannot ever bring forth the kingdom, because the kingdom can only be brought forth by Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. There is a breach, and that plays out through Scripture. If you don't understand that, then Bible prophecy will continue to escape you. And you will eventually get sucked into the big deception that Judah is trying to hold both birthright and kingdom, and it is illegal. Does that make sense? It's a serious thing. It's the most serious teaching there is. And it's not popular because it's not going to be funded by all the big lobbies, and it's not going to get you on GLC and everything, because, people don't like it when you start telling biblical truth. So there is a breach between the messianic line and the birthright. It's a breach between king and kingdom. That's the reality that we're living in today. So Yaakov, Israel, they went down into Mitzrayim. How long were they in Mitzrayim, Egypt? 210 years in Egypt. So Israel, on a national level, their first trouble was 210 years as a corporate nation, which directly parallels Jacob's 21-year time of trouble. Since we're dealing with the time of trouble on a greater level of fulfillment, the time frame is longer, but it's still characterized by the number 21. I like looking at all of your faces. So if Yaakov had how many tribulations? How many troubles? 2. So how many troubles should we see on a national level? So our first trouble is Israel goes down into Mitzrayim for 210 years. Now watch this. Israel's second time of trouble was a 210-year time of trouble, and of course directly parallels Jacob's 21-year separation from Joseph. Jacob's second trouble was when he separated from Joseph. 21 years. Was he in trouble? Was he in anguish? Was his very innards troubled for his son Joseph? That lasted 21 years. I think, personally, that would be a greater trouble than the first trouble, which was 21 years with Laban. Because of those of you that have sons or children, to be without your beloved son and to think that he is dead, but you don't know, that would be trouble. He dealt with that, his second trouble, for 21 years. That kind of stuff would turn your guts inside out every single night. no matter what joy you had in your life, no matter what bitter happiness you had on that day, you'd still be miserable and in trouble because you've lost your son. You think that is trouble. And parents, grandparents, you know what I'm talking about. So we see Jacob's two troubles. We're going to see now national Israel's two troubles. First national Israel trouble, 210 years in Egypt. Israel's second trouble was, of course, began at the death of Solomon in 931 before the Common Era, with the breach between Israel and Judah. And the northern kingdom lasted for 210 years. Isn't that amazing? 210 years until the fall of Samaria in 721 before the Common Era. Now, during this time, the tribes of Joseph were separated from Judah. Does that follow the pattern? Was Joseph in the first? Was he separated from Judah? Yeah, he was in slavery. In fact, Judah was the one that said, put him there, sell him, right? Let's make some money of him. Now, what was the reason for the revolt between the northern and southern kingdom? Let's tax them. Who said that? Judah. Same thing, right? Tribe of Judah, southern kingdom said, yeah, you know what? Yeah, my father, he taxed you this much. I'm going to tax you more. Same principle. It follows the pattern exactly. During this time, the tribes of Joseph were separated from Judah for 210 years, just as Jacob had been separated from Joseph for 21 years. Now the tribes of Joseph were separated from Judah for 210 years. Judah was the one who had suggested selling Joseph to the slave traders, and it's not a surprise then that Rehoboam, a Judahite, made the ill-advised decision to raise taxes further, which caused a separation between the tribes of Judah and Joseph. It's amazing. So the divided kingdom lasted exactly 210 years. Wow. Now we go to Melachim Bet, 2 Kings, chapter 18 through chapter 20, and we find now that we're going to find that there's a prophetic pattern for the repair of the breach. And the repair of the breach between the northern and the southern kingdom was done under whose rule? Hezekiah. And this took place 10 years after the fall of Samaria, or 220 years after the beginning of the breach. So this follows the 210-year cycle of Joseph's separation from his brethren, but it took another 10 years to heal the breach. So in Hezekiah's day, the pattern was national in scope, so the numbers reflect a longer cycle. I mean, it's just amazing. This is how the Bible tells us what we're to expect with Jacob's trouble. Not some hairy-fairy 7-year tribulation. Oh, it's Jacob's trouble, and listening to rabbis at the Western Wall. I like knowing what the Scripture says and where it comes from, because that's solid stuff for me to put my foot on, and to know that there is a division between kingdom and king right now. And you can't say that Ephraim was the one that was supposed to bring forth the king, because that's a lie. That's not true. And you can't say on the other foot that Judah is going to set up a kingdom, a Israel, and say it's true, because it's not. It's the deception that everybody's following, because nobody's got the backbone to stand up and warn the sheep, because they're concerned about, oh, well, maybe I won't get tithes and people might leave, and oh, my ministry, and they'll say I'm anti-Shemitic. No, you love the Jews as you love Ephraim, as you love all nations, creeds, and colors. Because Yahweh created all. But that doesn't mean that you don't speak truth. Can you tell I'm passionate about the subject? All right, back to work. So, what we see now is 210 also correlates to the captivity of the northern tribes in the second Mitzrayim now in the world. Because the northern tribes then were scattered into the nations, right? So now you're going to find that 210-year cycle in our captivity in the world. And the world is Egypt, right? This is our second captivity, if you will, in Egypt. So the captivity of the northern tribes began in 745 before the Common Era, with the loss of the 3 eastern tribes. Now 12 times 210 years, 12 representing ultimately there's going to be a collection of all 12 tribes. So 12 times 210 years from this date takes us to, who's a mathematician, Greg? 1776. Weird, huh? The establishment of the USA. But I thought you said USA isn't in Bible prophecy. One camp is hidden in a safe place. Why did Jacob divide his camps? Because he wanted to keep a camp back in case the first camp was destroyed by Esau. And that's exactly the pattern. Yahweh has divided his camps. Everybody is always known of Judah, but Ephraim has been hidden in the nations. And from 745, before the Common Era, we find the 210-year cycle brings us to 1776, the time of our captivity and our hiding place, of course, the USA. One camp hidden in a safe place. The 13th period of 210 years would bring us from 1776 to 1986. And it's a virtual repeat of the 210 years from 931 before the Common Era to 721 before the Common Era. You may recall that what happened in 931? Solomon died. So there's a repeat of that cycle. It's amazing. The house of Israel revolted against the Davidic monarchy over the issue of high taxes. What are we dealing with right now? I mean, it is going to cause... It follows the pattern exactly. You can say, oh man, you're just, a Bible teacher talking about tax. Seriously. Somebody sent me something this week, and it was a banknote of Zimbabwe, and it was like $10 trillion. So you can go and buy a bag of flour. We're not far from that. High taxes without representation. 1 Kings 12. The same thing occurred in 1776. And we're now at that end of that 13th cycle. And we're going to have that revolt too. In fact, we have a political party called the Tea Party. I mean, that's a new invention, representing the very idea of revolt right now. The American colonies revolted against the British. The Northern Kingdom revolted against the Southern Kingdom. And of course, Judah wanted to sell Joseph for money. Now, Yeshua came, we all know, as a lion from the tribe of Judah the first time. Why? It was in order to secure his throne rights as Messiah. That's why he came. It was in order to secure his throne rights as Messiah. He comes the second time, not to Judah, but to the tribes of Joseph, in order to secure his birthright, which is the kingdom. That's why we are dealing with the Middle East conflict. That's why there is such lies and deception going on right now. That's why. We live in an amazing time. And that Yahweh's opened my eyes to this is amazing. Amazing to see where I have come from. And it's not by anything but the presence of the Ruach HaKodesh and being in the Word. In Revelation 11, talks about the outer court. The Gentiles would trample the outer court for 42 months, 21 times 2. The temple with the inner court is going to be preserved, however, is it not? The outer court is breached and is occupied by the enemy and is a part of the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. The outer court is the court for the people of Israel as opposed to the court of the priests. Even in Yeshua's time, there was always an inner court and an outer court. And it was the outer court that caused all the trouble, right? But it was the inner court that were protected. What does this mean? It means that if you haven't entered into Yahweh's Melchizedek priesthood, and if you're not properly set apart and consecrated through faith, and walk into this fullness that what we've been talking about in the book of the covenant, you'll be overwhelmed. You'll be overwhelmed. Literally, you'll be overwhelmed in the great tribulation. There'll be too many voices. Oh, book of the law. Oh, Judah. Oh, Ephraim. Oh, Levites up on the temple. Yes, go, everyone. Let's go to Israel. Oh, no, let's all go to Oklahoma. Oh, come on. You'll be overwhelmed. Oh, no, they're sacrificing on the temple. Oh, maybe I should go there. Oh, what is this? Oh, hang on, let me get on the internet. Oh, bloody heck, the internet doesn't work anymore. I think I get more eccentric week by week. But they'll be overwhelmed during the tribulation. You'll be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, the infidels, and the uncircumcised of heart. The freedom and safety that lazy and lukewarm believers have enjoyed in the outer court, those who refuse to go into the inner court of the priestly service in the book of the covenant, which is Torah, takes maturity, it takes responsibility. It's about to be removed. The protection the lazy believer has taken for granted is about to be removed to shock him into returning to the sheep by repenting or, Brenda, going over to the goats by apostatizing. And so they're going to set you up. You're either going to repent or they're going to bring things in to cause you to go over to the goats and apostatize. That's why Brenda had the word of admonition for you. Because it's all about big numbers, it's all about more money, and that's insane. We have to stay the course. We have to stay the course. Do not see with the eyes, but hear the still small voice. That's it. I am so thankful that Yahweh has preserved us together all these years. It's amazing. So the second Yaakov's trouble, just to throw off all the messianic timelines, Joseph was sold, and Yaakov's second trouble again was 21 years he was separated from his beloved son. And Yaakov's trouble, the issue is always going to be what? The issue in Jacob's trouble is always going to be one thing: birthright. So on the Zumi tablets, it was recorded that if a man took 2 wives, then he would lose the inheritance. So Laban didn't want him to get the inheritance, so he offered Leah as a wife because he knew that Jacob would want to marry Rachel. Thus, he would have 2 wives and he would no longer be a threat of taking Laban's inheritance. I'm going to have you say this because this is very important. Let's say it in here.
What was on this article was that those little gods that Rachel took, the father would give that to the son to claim the inheritance. So in case Laban died, if there was ever a dispute over the land or the birthright, he could take his father's gods in and say, look, my father gave me these. This is proof that the inheritance belongs to me. And that, in theory, is why Rachel took him and hid him, because of what Laban did, making him marry Leah first and Rachel second, thus losing the birthright. And Rachel was trying to get that for her husband.
Which explains why then Laban had the pillars, had them draw the
But
pillars.
not only that, taken, 3 days to trap him down.
Right.
That would have cost a lot of money for little gods. Why? Doesn't make any sense.
Because it was a
There some value to
birthright.
it.
Excellent. And what was what was Joseph given? He was given the birthright coat, the birthright tunic, which is why the sons hated him without a cause. So anytime you're dealing with Yaakov's trouble, it's always going to be about birthright. Birthright, which is kingdom, which is land, which is the name Israel. So Yaakov's trouble, the issue is birthright always. So bring that forward to our day, and now we've got a Jewish company that gets billions of dollars, and what's it called? Birthright. So, restoration of the birthright seed, that's what's really going on in the prophetic timetable. And Joseph silently suffers as he did before in Egypt while the world looks elsewhere, right? Today, the world is looking elsewhere for the birthright when Joseph, Ephraim, is suffering silently in the exile and nobody's looking. They're dead. Well, they're 10 lost tribes. They're dead, 10 lost tribes. The birthright is the land. 2 camps of people. Jacob had 2 camps of people. We've got the 2 houses of Israel, hidden in the nations. The very purpose of the exile is to prepare for the full restoration of all biblical Israel. Exile is always understood as a temporary measure of discipline for a set period of time. The only difference between first covenant Israel and new covenant Israel is that new covenant Israel has wandered for 40 jubilees, not 40 years. 40 times 50, 2,000 years instead of a mere 40 years we've been wandering. And Kepha Aleph says in chapter 5, verse 8, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your enemy, Satan, as a roaring lion walks around on the earth, seeking whom he can devour. Resist him steadfast in the emunah, faith, knowing that the same afflictions in your Israelite brothers that are all over the olam." Satan is looking for the family of Jacob, the flock of Jacob, Israel, but the camps have been divided for the preservation of the brethren. That's the reality. In Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 30, when you are in distress, that would be Yaakov's trouble, and all these things have come upon you in the latter days, when you turn to Yahweh your Elohim and obey his voice, for Yahweh your Elohim is a merciful Elohim. He will not forsake you nor destroy you, nor forget the covenant of your fathers which he swore to them. He will not forget the book of the covenant which he swore to them. That's what it's talking about. It's amazing stuff. Yaakov's trouble deals with 21 years. It happened twice. Yaakov went into trouble and Yaakov's trouble twice. Then it is fulfilled on a national level twice with the 210-year cycles.
You know what was amazing, and I've watched this several times, and when he talked about 210 years and multiply that by 12, and he was saying, does someone have a calculator to do that? Well, honestly, I never did that, but while I was, listening to it as a third go around, I did. And interesting enough, that calculates to be 2,520 years. Or if we're looking at the last week, the final week, with 2 1260s, which equal 2,520 days. So I just discovered that. So that's amazing. Multiplying 210 years by 12 gives you 2,520 years, but the last 7 years equals 2,520 days. And then when you subtract the 2,300 timeline, it gives you the number 220. So there's probably more to that than we can even go into tonight, because Yah just revealed those numbers and the significance behind them this past Shabbat. So he's just walking us through this. He's sharing with us different insights to these timelines and preparing us for the last final 7 years, and also understanding what those last final 7 years is all about. It's about the breach between the king and the kingdom. It's about the separation of Joseph, the 10 lost tribes from Judah. It's about bringing together all the tribes eventually. So throughout the book of Daniel, I'll try to wrap this up pretty quickly. We've had 7 timelines. The timeline number 1 talked about 7 literal years. Remember that back in Daniel chapter 4, verse 16. Nebuchadnezzar was sent to live among the animals. He essentially became a beast king and kingdom. Now, at the time, we felt like that was just probably only significant to Nebuchadnezzar, and that's done. It has no significance for us in the end of days. Well, I look at that differently. I see parallels to the last 7 years. And we see beast king, another beast king rising, and another beast kingdom rising. And in Daniel 4:16, it said, let his heart be changed from man's, let him be given the heart of a beast. When someone is sold out to SA-10, when someone's DNA is changed, that person is it is a beast. It is no longer human. And let 7 times pass over him. So in the end of days, I'm just sharing here that the beast king and kingdom will rise. It will begin with a 7-year agreement, but the Antichrist will still be hidden, will not be revealed until he breaks the agreement midway. And he'll be revealed after the falling away, and then the Antichrist will be revealed. And it will end, of course, with Yahushua's victory. And it'll be an easy victory. He'll do away with him with the sword of his mouth. And in timeline number 2, we studied a 1260 timeline. In Daniel, we did the day-year computation. That one was Daniel's 725, knowing about the persecution of Yahweh's people in the dark ages and in the end of days. And we had that time frame framed by the Roman Emperor Justinian's decree, which became effective in AD 538, to Napoleon's voice of judgment in 1798, both AD. So that does seem accurate as far as representing the 1260 time frame in the book of Daniel, when it said, and speak words against the Most High. Now in Daniel 7:25, it says, and it speaks words against the Most High, and it wears out the set apart ones of the Most High. And this is in regards to the latter days, the 1260 days in the latter days, and it intends to change appointed times and laws, and they are given into its hand for a time and times and half a time. So here we go, that it is a beast king running a beast kingdom. The timeline, 2,300 days, the ram and the he-goat. I see this timeline strictly as a day calculation timeline. I simply just don't see it in Daniel's day. I see it being communicated to Daniel. It was for the time of the end. Therefore, I don't do the day-year computation. Some may choose to do that. I don't see that, so I can't relate to that, and I can't teach that. But in Daniel 8:14, it said, and he said to me, for 2,300 nights, then that which is set apart shall be made right. Understand, son of man, for the vision is for the time of the end. In Daniel 8, verse 19, and said, look, I am making known to you what shall take place in the latter time of the wrath. And the wrath of Elohim doesn't take place till the very end of time, for at the appointed time shall be the end. Daniel 8:23, and in the latter time of their rule, when the transgressors have filled up their measure, a sovereign, fierce of face, and skilled at intrigues shall stand up. And Daniel 8:25, and through his skill he shall make deceit prosper in his hand, and hold himself to be great in his heart, and destroy many who are at ease, and even stand against the prince of princes. Yet without hand he shall be broken. I mean, it's just the word from Yahusha's mouth. And Daniel 8:26b, and hide the vision, for it is after many days. Timeline number 4 was the 490 years, the 70 weeks. Daniel 9:24. We see that in beginning with Artaxerxes' decree of 457 BC, and some make that a full continuum of 490 years. And we've seen how, like in the videos with Mark McMillian, he acknowledges a gap. Personally, I acknowledge a gap. But, you know, like I've always said, there's different perspectives. Now that is covered in the 70 weeks are decreed for your people and for your set apart city, to put an end to the transgression and to seal up sins and to cover crookedness, and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up vision and profit, and to anoint the most set apart. Know then and understand from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah, the Prince, is 7 weeks and 62 weeks, thereby meaning 69 weeks. It shall be built again with streets and a trench, but in times of affliction. And after the 62 weeks, and then of course you also add that 7 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, which he was crucified and have not. And the people of a coming prince shall destroy the city and the set apart place. And the end of it is with a flood, and waste are decreed, and fighting until the end. And he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. And in the middle of the week, he shall put an end to slaughtering and meal offering, and on the wing of abominations he shall lay waste, even until the complete end, and that which is decreed is poured out on the one who lays waste. Now, some that keep it continuous ended with the time of Stephen, the first martyr after Yahushua HaMashiach. And timeline number 5 was the 1260 days in Daniel 12, verse 7. But it's recorded as for an appointed time, appointed times, and half a time. And when they have ended scattering the power of the set apart people, then all these things shall be completed. So that's definitely at the very last 42 months, or times, and half a time, which we know equates to 1260 days. And again, the Antichrist is given 42 months right here. He was given authority to do so 42 months, very clear. Timeline number 6 was the 1290 days. And from the time that which is continual is taken away, that's the tricky word right there, that Hebrew word for taken away. Is it taken away, or is it lifted up, or is it alteration? I went with alteration, and that's why my 1290 day timeline may vary from others. Timeline number 7 was the 1335. Blessed is he who is waiting earnestly and comes to the 1,335 days. So those are the timelines. And I've shared about the 2 witnesses possibly being in this first part, with the great falling away, people getting confused about Christian Zionism and so forth. And the beast rising up out of the pit that kills the 2 witnesses, and they lay in the street for 3.5 days before they're called up to heaven. Now, if that takes place about here in 1335 days, I would definitely say they are definitely blessed. The 1290, the alteration from animal sacrifices to who knows what, that would begin the 1290. Clearly, the Antichrist reigns for 42 months. Clearly, the woman is nourished in the wilderness, given 2 wings as an eagle, flown to the wilderness, and she is nourished by Elohim for 3.5 years. But also, we have to keep in mind that wilderness is often connected to witnessing. John the Immerser was out in the wilderness and he was witnessing. Israel was taken out of Egypt and wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, but all the pagan nations would look at her from on high, from those high mountaintops, and she was a witness to Yahweh leading them out of Egypt by his righteous right hand. So I don't think the woman in the wilderness is going to just be doing nothing. I think she too will be a strong witness in the end of days. And of course, Satan goes to make war with the remnant of her seed, which is probably the 144,000. So that covers tonight. And I'll stop share, and then we'll have some Q&A. So I don't know, that was really cool. When I was just writing down some of these numbers that was being reviewed, and I did that multiplication of 210 times 12, I would have never thought that it would be 2520. Interesting. Hi, Betty. Yeah, you have your hand up.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for tonight. For one thing, in another study that I'm involved in, we've been talking about kingdom and how important that is. And this just added another link for me tonight. I really appreciate it. I had not made that connection between Judah and Israel, you know, the birthright and the having to do with the land and with the kingship. So, and let's see. Oh, also really appreciated your focus on the catching away. because that's still a little confusing to me, and I think that really helped me a lot tonight when you talked about that. But it was a really, really good study. Really appreciated it. Thank you.
Well, good, Betty. Yeah, when we were studying the book of Revelation several times, yeah, I was amazed at locating these times. I mean, two witnesses are, called up to heaven, and the child is caught up to the throne room, and the woman is given two wings like an eagle. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of repositioning, catching away. Very, very interesting. And at that time, it was just like, yeah, well, that's why people are so confused. That's why there's so many divided camps. It's a pre-trib catching away. It's a mid-trib. It's a, it's very, very interesting, because if you work on your timeline and you try to consider all those variables, it really makes a person think.